this is the Dr. Deborah Show, and this is the show where we talk about bringing peace and calm into your life. Later in the show, we'll talk about mental health stigma. We're live at KCSB FM Santa Barbara 91.9, and KCSB is a platform for cultural expression and thoughtful discussion, providing a diverse educational forum. I'm a Santa Barbara-based clinical psychologist, and I specialize in pediatric neuropsychology. And during my clinical training and my current work, I've treated thousands of people, and I want to share my experiences with you. I'm also a UCSB alumni, and I live locally in Santa Barbara. And this show is all about our community and how to create compassionate conversations about our well-being and health. Again, I want to welcome our listeners to the Dr. Deborah Show. It's wonderful to have you with us. And as a reminder, this show is psychoeducational and is in the area of neuropsychology and well-being. It is not meant to replace professional mental health advice or therapy. So if you do believe you suffer from a particular disorder, please do reach out for professional help. And today on the show, we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being with a focus on firefighting, disasters, and community resilience with our very special guest, Kevin Taylor. Kevin Taylor was appointed fire chief of the Montecito Fire Department in July 2019. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yay. And Chief Taylor came to the Montecito Fire Department in February 2015 after serving the prior 25 years in the city of Paso, Robles Fire Department. Chief Taylor has a bachelor's degree in fire administration and a master's degree in emergency management. He was also a founding member of the Santa Barbara County Type 3 Incident Command Team and served as an incident commander for several years prior to promoting to fire chief. Chief Taylor was one of the unified commanders of the 1-9 debris flow event in Montecito and remains actively engaged in community resilience. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Deborah.
And I'm so excited to have Kevin because we have a special topic we're going to weave into the show because we're both big believers in hugs. So as we talk, we might intersperse some ideas about hugs, but I'm very excited to have Kevin here to help share his wisdom. And here's what's next. We'll talk a little bit about mental health stigma, and then we'll talk about mental health and firefighting, disasters, community resilience, and then a bit about prevention awareness through firefighting, disasters, and community resilience. And we're talking about mental health stigma today because did you know that mental health is the largest public health priority? It's also the largest financial burden of any health issue in the world. That's according to the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. There's also a beautiful report that the Centers for Disease Control wrote. It's pretty big. It's called Attitudes Toward Mental Illness. And they found that stigma and embarrassment are two of the top reasons why people with mental health issues do not seek help or medication. I always like to just preface the show with the idea that issues surrounding mental health affect people from all walks of life. None of us are really immune from it. We all kind of have days where things don't go right, and some of us have more severe things. But I think hopefully in our future we'll change the way we think about mental health too, where it's just part of our health. And then I was going to just explain briefly what is mental health. I think of mental health as kind of like a physiological balance where our brain and our nervous system are kind of beating and moving at a nice balanced rate, and our thoughts as well. And that, I think that gives us a sense of inner peace. I was wondering, Kevin, what do you think? How would you describe mental health?
Well, first, I love your description, right? Because really, you're talking about homeostasis, where our entire body is maintaining this balance or equilibrium. But you can't stop short of feeling that that's only the physical part, right? It's also the mental and spiritual part. So what we talk a lot about in the first responder community is it's not just mental health, it's also your physical health and your spiritual health. It's really interesting on our job when we hire an applicant, we put them through a very rigorous testing process to ensure when they come on board that they're 100% physically, mentally, and spiritually intact. And then we put them out there on the street actually providing this wonderful service to our communities and expect them to stay that way so that they can serve the community for a 30-year career. What's been missing in all of that is actually how do we help them stay mentally and spiritually healthy. We work very hard on their physical health, right? We require them to exercise, do physical fitness. We give them a medical evaluation every single year. But we've been neglecting this whole notion of mental and spiritual health until just recently. And so I think that the stigma that you mentioned very much existed in the emergency responder community, but that the veil is finally being lifted.
What do you think changed that?
So several things, right? So the preponderance of disasters, research in PTSD or PTSI, whichever is the appropriate term nowadays, and the ability of the younger generation to maybe be a little bit more open and honest with what they felt was okay and not okay. And then that translating up the chain of command to the very top where the leadership recognized that, hey, we provide this exceptional service to our community. These young men and women are the instruments of that service. They're who actually does that, the tip of the spear that helps a community member. And so really the only way that any organization that does emergency response is going to be successful is to take care of those people that provide that service.
Right, because it all trickles down and around, right?
Exactly right.
It's kind of, well, I mean, I think that's the idea we were talking about, Kevin and I, a little bit before the show, is like the idea of like kind of the oneness, so to speak, of that we're all kind of intertwined and we kind of all affect each other. So I think it's important to kind of spread that love out there.
It's
and
critical.
Caring and listening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same. So it's the same empathy that we expect the responders to provide to the community member at their moment of need. It's reasonable for them to expect that from their leadership back at the fire station or in their organization.
Well, that's great that you do that. Yeah,
that's been the big change, I think, right? That love or empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, to understand someone else's suffering and then, be able to take care of them is really healthy, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started on the job, when there was a very difficult issue, it was, hey, that's the job, right? Accept it. That's the normal, or don't. Go find something else to do, kid. Right.
Well, that's kind of the like kind of outdated philosophy that I always try to enlighten people to about my practice or wherever, is that, the idea of like pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get going. And then that is kind of true, right? Like you have to get to the places where you need to get to. But at the same time, I mean, if you have something going on, you still have to address it.
So pull yourself up by the bootstraps is fantastic if there's a support mechanism to help that person pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Because in any success, it's shared, right? There's a shared responsibility by the individual that having the issue, the organization that employs them, the community that they live in, their friends, their neighbors, their family, that entire connection, the things that make all of us whole. So that there's a support network that has to be present, I think. And I always think that support network is how we pull people up by the bootstraps. It's not them reaching down and pulling up their bootstraps.
It's kind of very tribal. I mean, had somebody come on, they were talking about how, I mean, if you go back to Africa and people are living in tribes, I mean, if you don't have your group or your, connection or support,
don't survive.
You can't survive. And you also brought up homeostasis, which I always like to elaborate on that too, because when I was doing my research, that was pretty much what it was homeostasis. And all the researchers and scientists I was working with said, oh, you can't call it homeostasis anymore. See, this hasn't even come out in the news. That's why I'm excited as it comes out. And so what they said was it's actually called dynamic regulation. And so dynamic regulation incorporates kind of how our internal world and our external world meet. So like our external world would be our people, places, sounds, smell, all our stimuli that's coming in, our input. And then our internal system, did I say that right? It was our external. And our internal system would be, like we were talking about our heart, our nervous system, our brain, our thoughts, our psyche, our soul, all those pieces. And then how do we actually get the level of what we call intuition, which people think of as metaphysical, but it actually takes place deep in our brain. It's a neurological function. And what happens when all that culminates in a really nice, healthy way, we get that balance we were talking about, we can trust ourselves. And I think of that as like the pinnacle of health, when we can trust ourselves, that it's okay to share. Like you and I, we can feel safe in that with ourselves and with each other. So I like to just elaborate on homeostasis. But it is true. We all need that. You know what I mean? Homeostasis, too.
That was a great description as you talk about those external and internal influences and where they intersect.
Yes.
Is really where people have challenges, I think. Us, you and I included from our conversation earlier. So how how do you choose internally and as you just articulated chemically inside your body to respond to that external stimulus.
It all
very
happens
interesting.
very fast,
yeah,
too.
interesting.
Well, I mean, I think that that would be a powerful thing if we could all learn that in a way that's kind of naturally happening with what you're talking about, whereas a group and individually with fire, it sounds like with, especially in your fire department, or maybe, is that a California theme, do you think, or is that just locally that where you're talking about from the top down that people are able to kind of conversate?
I think that it's occurring nationally. So all of our professional organizations, it's their number one priority. It has been for a handful of years. It most certainly is for the near future. So it's our current priority.
I think it's exciting for me because I do see in a lot of different fields that mental health stigma is being talked about. And also, I think around the globe, mental health needs are much more being recognized and addressed. And also in the fire service, like specifically, the information I found is that great strides have been made regarding mental and behavioral health awareness. And elected officials are expressing like a greater sense of urgency, too, for services dedicated to the fire and first responder community. And so the barriers to treatment that were once in place are beginning to kind of lift. And
all of that is so true and so exciting, right? As you look at the younger people that you're hiring, again, I said earlier that it's a 30-year career. That's a full career in the fire service. And when you look back at the number of firefighters that are killed in the line of duty and compare that to the number of firefighters that are taking their own lives, and realize that many, many more firefighters are taking their own lives than are being killed in the line of duty, I think everybody recognizes, well, that's a problem.
I just think people don't realize that. That's one reason I like to talk about suicide, even because I know people don't want to talk about suicide. But like when I had Greg Fish on, the Summerlin Carpinteria fire chief, we talked about that as well. And the idea that most people probably think firefighters or first responders get killed in the line of duty. And I thought that was a powerful idea. It's like, it's not that. It's actually, taking their own lives. It's a pretty high, versus getting killed.
So there's a spectrum of injuries that occur to, that person's whole community. So imagine that they start to have difficulties at work, and so maybe there's a performance problem that's directly related to something else that's going on, but nobody recognizes that. And then that problem translates to home, and then they're not happy at work, and then they're not happy at home.
It spills over.
It does, right? Because all of these things, like we just said, they're all interconnected. So the challenge is removing the stigma from having a problem. In other words, we all have problems.
Exactly.
It's okay to have a problem.
I mean, we're human. Actually, I think life would be really boring if we didn't have problems.
Can you imagine? Could you imagine that is so, because you wouldn't be in the real world, right? It would be like this utopian
and also
society.
be like a flatliner. You would just be like,
emotion-free, wouldn't get to enjoy. Think of the way that your body feels when you witness a beautiful sunrise or a sunset. None of that would exist for you.
Exactly. Well, and I think, too, that for every kind of light, there's a dark, but it kind of balances it out. We can't always have everything. Even nature's that way. If you look at a leaf, at one point it's like bright and green and crisp and fresh, and at some point it's going to dry out and die, and things happen. And so it's how do you move through those different obstacles?
So we all recognize those changes in nature as normal.
I know, that's why I like nature. We could use that as an analogy.
Precisely. Yep.
So I think we could use nature. And I also think animals are very powerful, like our pets. Like I have a dog and a cat, and just the ultimate compassion they have. It's like my dog will always love me no matter what.
Unconditional love, right? I have a 9-year-old lab named Abby.
Yep.
And every time she sees me, it's like it's the very first time that she's seen me.
Isn't that beautiful?
Unconditional love.
And actually, there's some great studies that came out about 6 to 8 months ago about if you look in your dog or your pet's eyes and spend a moment just really looking at them, it's very good for your heart. Reduces heart disease, actually. So I think there's going to be more evidence about pets and animals and, the importance they shed on our lives.
I can tell you that at larger incidents, we utilize pets to help defuse all of the traumas that the responders are going through. So these beautiful dogs come with handlers, and they're just there to be loved on because they love the responder back unconditionally. Wonderful, wonderful success.
I almost think like if there was like a bad car accident and someone goes into the hospital, I just would be curious, like if they did a study on that, almost like what the impact would be of having that, like they brought horses even into hospitals, just in those incidences. If you had more pets, I don't know if that neutralizes or some, you know what I mean, for the person, for the stress levels.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
That's really cool, though, that you guys bring pets in that way.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So part of my role and responsibility, too, as a psychologist is just to help dispel stigma. And I'm always hoping we can come up with a new word for stigma and for mental health. I feel like mental health needs to be updated. But, I think over time, the meaning of the word stigma has kind of shifted and changed. But I'd like to just briefly explain the idea of social stigma or self-stigma. And social stigma is when we have attitudes and discriminating behavior that are directed towards individuals with mental health problems as a result of a label they may have been given. And then self-stigma is when we internalize, if the mental health sufferer internalizes their perception of discrimination. I think this is very common. For example, if we had everything kind of running smoothly and then maybe we saw somebody else suffering with mental health issues with depression and we thought, oh my gosh, I can't be around that person, but then we ourselves get depression, then we kind of have that discrimination. So I think it's really important because we need to take care of our selves by being able to discuss our emotions, thoughts, and feelings within ourselves. So if you're just joining us now, we're talking about mental health and firefighting, disasters, and community resilience with Kevin Taylor. And Kevin, I was wondering, could you just explain, I know you kind of did a briefly, but also could you explain a little bit more about how firefighting, disasters, and community resilience as concepts and mental health, how they may relate or intersect?
So that's such an interesting concept to me, where there's a mental health piece that's involved in everything that a firefighter does to prepare themselves to respond when they're actually responding, and then probably most importantly when they're processing what they've just done or seen after the incident. And then from a community and then that's highlighted even or amplified during a disaster,
right?
Because by definition during a disaster there are more problems or emergencies than there are responders available. And one of the very worst things for a responder is that feeling of helplessness, right? So all of their professional pride and dignity comes from the ability to help. Yeah. And when you take that away, you're overwhelmed, you're not able to help all of the people.
Sure.
That's definitely a triggering event. And then finally, for a community relative to resiliency, in my mind, resiliency is really all about attitude. And attitude is all about your mental health. In other words, can we recover from what just occurred? Resiliency is really the return to normal. Can we recover from what just occurred? And if the answer is no, that we have to change the community's attitude. And really an effective way to do that is by pointing out all of the positive, productive things that come out of these horrible events.
It's true.
In other words, some of the worst things that happen to us as human beings result in the very best outcomes if we're able to see the forest through the trees.
I know. I just think people have gotten so accustomed to not liking uncomfortability. And I kind of liken it to boogie boarding, It's you kind of have to paddle and then you get on the board, it gets a little rough, but then you kind of cruise out at the end and it's pretty smooth. Or Gandhi, he always said out of turbulence comes peace, but I think it's kind of that turbulence that people don't like.
So I would encourage everybody to embrace and enjoy that part of the journey, because that's really where your growth is coming from, at least in my personal experience.
How do you think someone who's listening that might feel a little scared of that, or like, oh, that sounds like a big step for me, or leap, or...
Right. So the same way that I would recommend any change be made, little small increments.
So true.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I hate to use that euphemism, but the only way to grow that works for me personally is to take these little small steps outside of my comfort zone, right? To recognize that, hey, you're not supposed to know everything, be everything, understand everything. For as long as you live, there's going to be opportunities for growth. Those are uncomfortable situations. I mean, let's be honest, right? It's uncomfortable. If you choose to be comfortable embrace it in an uncomfortable situation. By definition, you're comfortable.
Well, and actually, I think as you get more used, like I love challenges like that because I've gotten very accustomed to that. But I think, once you kind of sink into that idea of like, it's okay, I don't have to know everything.
Yeah.
It's okay to change and evolve and grow.
Right. It's being open and honest with yourself, I think, right?
It's painful
open,
sometimes.
honest, and transparent with yourself. When I talk about this at work to the firefighters and our staff, I encourage them to take the mirror test, right? It's like, hey, look in the mirror and do you see what you want to see? And if you don't, what steps are you changing so that you do see what you want to see?
I love
and
that.
a lot of that is just how you feel about yourself.
So kind of keeping in check with yourself, checking out who you are, and then kind of maintaining that.
A checkup.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, so if you're a man, you have to shave every morning on our job, and that's a great time. Right? Or can you look
Is that a
yourself in
requirement?
the
You have
eye?
to shave every day?
You do, yeah. You have to be clean
That's why you
shaven,
guys are
right?
always so clean
So
shaven.
yeah, exactly. So when you're looking at yourself shaving, you have two choices. You can either look yourself in the eye and go, "Hey, I'm pleased with where I'm at in my life," or you can watch the razor. Right? Which means, hey, there's probably a little bit of growth to do. And some days I watch the razor, some days I look myself in the eye, but every day I embrace being uncomfortable.
Well, and then you were talking about I know being resilient and growing out of kind of like, right, sometimes like disasters and
Right.
things like that. And I do think actually it's made our community here much stronger.
Incredibly, right? So the absolute worst thing that the worst series or sequence of things that could possibly happen to a community happened to our community. And from the ashes and from the mud has come this wonderful community spirit that didn't exist, quite frankly, before those two events. And a lot of that has to do with mental health in my mind. So it's super important.
Well, and togetherness. I know I went to this, like they have that Night of Heroes at Montecito School, and I was there, and I like what the lady who was heading that up, it was like right after the mudslide or debris flow.
Yep, debris flow.
The debris flow, and she was saying, they're talking about the principal of the Montecito Union and how he got hired, and it was like, well, you kind of came into this little bubble, but the bubble got burst, and they were forced, you're forced to kind of, everybody had to collaborate, and so in a way, sometimes forced things, I guess, right? They bring about positive.
We're back to uncomfortable, right?
Yep.
In other words, if you've been operating in a silo, you get very comfortable in your little space. It becomes very uncomfortable to look outside of that silo because there's exposure there, right? If you look out, somebody else can be looking
The only
in.
thing with that is that it's an illusion to like
Of
deny
course.
that. It's actually, it's an honoring of yourself too.
I tell you, so collaboration in all things, in my mind, is key, right? Having empathy for the person that you're collaborating with, understanding their situation, how you can help them and how they can help you.
Right.
So that both of you are more successful than you are today. It's almost like a sports team, right? I know you were a tennis player. I was a baseball player. So in sports, the collective, the sum, is better than the individual parts.
That's the true nature of sports. Sportsmanship,
Exactly.
camaraderie,
Right.
like learning from losses and gains. And
Right.
it's
So
true.
that's the collaboration piece, really. I mean, it's what we're all shooting for, I think.
So the idea I think we're both kind of talking about is like if you do feel uncomfortable, maybe I guess like I like that suggestion though. What Kevin's saying, maybe when you do look in the mirror when you're like brushing your teeth or you're combing your hair or whatever time it is you look in the mirror, just take 10 seconds and just check in with yourself and see, maybe what's going on with you too. I think that's really healthy.
It certainly has helped me. Many times I look there and go, oh gosh, you have some work to do, young man.
I do that. I will look in the mirror and I usually assess how tired I am. I'm very into sleep. So I'm like, did I get enough sleep or did I not get enough sleep? And I always check in and think, what do I need today? How do I want to start my day?
Right.
What do what's going on for me? And I think that is really healthy. And if you can do that throughout your day, that's really great too. Just to kind of give yourself some loyalty and love. And that spills out into your relationships too.
Agreed.
I know that I looked up, there's this IAFF Center of Excellence for Behavioral Health Treatment and Recovery. And I guess that it's a group basically that's predominantly focused on treating firefighters. I don't know if you ever heard about that. And then their challenge is like, they're focusing on the stigma associated with firefighters seeking help. Have you ever heard about that or no?
Of course.
Yeah, okay.
So the IAFF is the International Association of Firefighters. So it's the union that firefighters belong to. And it's a international union all around the world, and
Nice.
they've recognized that the stigma must be removed. One of the beautiful things about that initiative from the IAFF is that another group called the International Association of Fire Chiefs supports that initiative. So this represents an example of labor and management working in lockstep, arm in arm, together, collaboratively, however you want to choose to describe it, to actually tackle this problem in our profession. That the greatest takeaway for me from that particular center is the training that they provide that allows us all the way down in Little Montecito from this international association, and in every fire department in Santa Barbara County, by the way, not just Montecito, to have peer counselors.
Awesome. So you firefighter.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we have 5 in our fire department that have received professional training to actually act as a peer counselor to any of us that may choose to talk to them. The people were not chosen randomly, right? They're the most open, empathetic people that firefighters that other firefighters are comfortable talking to. And then they go through some very rigorous training so that they recognize and understand when something is beyond their expertise, so that a referral occurs. Because again,
Awesome.
the goal is to remove this stigma and actually help the individual
To deal with what's going
that
on.
has a problem. Yeah, and I should plug just one more program real quick, if that's okay. Our district attorney, Joyce Dudley,
Right.
has
like to
if
have
you are, I'll stop right now if you have it in the rest of your notes.
No,
there. Okay.
I don't.
Yeah, so
I was just saying, someone told me I should have her come on.
You should. So Joyce has put together this wonderful, wonderful program to help us put all of our peer support networks together, so that if Montecito Fire is having an issue and none of our peer counselors are available, we might be able to get one from the DA's office or Santa Barbara
because they have them
PD.
there too.
Right.
The DA's office has them, or they coordinate all
They
that?
have them.
So they have.
As does Cottage Hospital, as does every fire department in Santa Barbara County and every police department. So Joyce really grabbed a hold of this program and has been a champion, just a wonderful champion for all of the responders.
She probably witnesses and sees a lot about, mental health too. She's been around a long time.
Yep.
I was thinking you brought up something, I just remembered it like a couple minutes ago, about attitude.
Yeah.
And there's a famous psychologist, his name's Albert Ellis, and he founded what we call rational emotive behavioral therapy. And I like to teach people this idea because it relates to what you're talking about.
Sure.
And he calls it the ABCs, but I kind of call it can kind of be the BACs in a way. And he talks about how our attitude, I think it's actually our belief forms our attitude determines our behavior. But I think you can kind of swap attitude and belief a little bit. But it's true, right? So if we think about what is our attitude toward a situation, like I'm afraid to deal with something because I don't know what's going to happen, right? That will put a freeze on moving forward.
Right.
Versus, or a belief that, maybe I don't know if I can do this, versus
Sure.
I'll see what it's all about. So think about the language also you're telling yourself. Because I think sometimes we get ourselves convinced, like, something, and maybe it's not really even true. And, I think if we have even just an open attitude of the unknown, that could be a great starting place of just, let's see what happens. It's like an adventure or an experiment, or however you want to preface it.
Sure. I would say it's life.
Exactly. It's life.
Yeah.
Well, and I've been talking a lot about the Colorado River because about a month and a half or two ago, I saw this beautiful aerial view of the Colorado River. If you haven't checked it out, go online. It's really cool if you find a great aerial. It's very curvy.
Yeah.
And lots of twists and turns.
I have had the honor of being there.
And then, some of it's very smooth when you are on the water, and some of it's very, fatal and rough. So that's how life is, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
It takes lots of twists
great
and turns.
analogy.
Thanks, Kevin. I was wondering, from your experience, how do you, let's see here. Now I've got to go through my next question because I've got so much data I looked up because it's just fascinating. Actually, the World Health Organization has a whole system in place to help firefighters and first responders. Why do you think reducing mental health stigma is so essential?
Well, first off,
because
it's the right thing to do, right? So there is no stigma to coronary artery disease.
Exactly.
There's no stigma to hypertension, diabetes, all of these are at epidemic levels in our community and our society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what makes them different than mental health? It's back to my mental, spiritual, and physical health issue. As human beings, there are things in our lives that we can control, and there are things in our lives that we can't control. But what we can always control is how we respond to them. If you know that somebody has a mental health issue,
Mm-hmm.
how you choose to respond to their mental health issue may or may not add or subtract from the stigma in
Mm-hmm.
general, right? I mean,
That's
I hate
true,
to
yeah.
oversimplify, but I'm a simple guy, so
Simple's good.
right? So it's normal. In other words, your river analogy,
It's healthy.
it is
I like the word healthy.
it's healthy. That's
Yeah.
much better.
Normal is actually like, in my,
Yeah.
like I always like to demystify it because it's kind of like a bell curve, really. I mean, it's like but healthy is what we want, I think,
I
and
say,
balance.
the height and weight chart, right, for the insurance company.
That's true. That's true. It is
So
in that.
are you a normal weight, Kevin? Well, which chart?
Exactly. And I mean, really, I think a better question would be, are you healthy? I'm sure you're
Exactly. So healthy is a very, very good way
I
to
think that's a
describe
better, or
it.
balanced, or those kinds of
Yeah,
ideas.
I like healthy. Healthy
Yeah.
has such a positive connotation to it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you say, boy, that person looks healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great.
Well, and it's okay if we're not always healthy. I mean, we're not.
Well,
Gonna
no,
be
that's the
perfect.
rapids in the river, right? There has to be.
Well, I think the rapids exactly on the
Yeah,
Colorado River.
Precisely.
Well, and I think that I was looking up some ways to just like I think the fire service has developed, like you're saying, like a lot of mental health support resources, and I am like through mental health training, peer support training, like you're talking, and other programs that are available.
Right.
But like some of the ways that I think the firefighter community, at least according to what I found
Sure.
out, is continuing to reduce mental health stigma, which I'm really happy about, is like above all, take care of your own mental and emotional health. Learn facts and statistics about common behavioral health issues that may impact the fire service. Show empathy not only to the public but to each other. Avoid stereotyping people or crew members who
Right.
have a behavioral health disorder. Explore peer support resources. Become involved in your community. They're all great things like you're talking about with support. So I think the fire service is really serving as a leader actually to other public safety occupations by promoting, the behavioral health as an important component of overall health. So I'm very happy
Excellent.
because, I do think physical fitness and heart health and nutrition are really important.
Right.
But I think this community, is continuing to support and promote healthier living habits is kind of
We are.
another way of looking at it. I was wondering, Kevin, what has your work in the firefighting, disasters, and community resilience fields taught you about the attitudes people hold toward mental health? Do people
Oh,
talk about
gosh.
mental health in your experience over the years, or
So they do now.
right? But over
But
time,
previously, so this is my 30th year on this job. And, I'm going to be blunt and honest. For the first 20 years of my job, this did not come up.
it didn't everyone skirted around
Absolutely
it,
not, right? And so the way that people coped with people that were having issues was to isolate them.
which is like the opposite of what you need.
Of course, the exact opposite of what the appropriate response would have been. They can't take it. They're not cut out for this job. They should find another profession. They're not a valuable member of the team.
Kind of cut and dry. Mm-hmm.
It was very cut and dried, close. We use a saying that it was. I heard this several times early in my career. It's like, hey, suck it up, Buttercup.
It's true.
It's like
That's the
this
same
is
thing to
what
pull
it is.
yourself up by the boot.
Exactly, same, just a different saying. But over the last 5 to 10 years, all of that has gone away, fortunately, where it's no longer, so it's not okay to behave the way that we behaved the previous 20 years.
Yeah.
Like that's become actionable
Yep.
from an employment standpoint. It has to be the other way. So organizations have, and I think all emergency responders, not just firefighters, have actually recognized the importance of that person that actually delivers the service and the whole person,
Right.
not just their physical ability to do that, but that it takes so much more.
The whole job it's not just the
Right,
physicality. Well, I know
right.
people do think of firefighters and it's like, they're like, oh my gosh, they're so fit and they've got such good physiques and they can lift ladders and climb buildings. You know what I mean? Well, there is that
Right.
physicality of your job.
Right.
But I would guess, don't you think that probably the way your mental health is impacts your physicality?
Way more. Well, so yes, and I would say from an importance standpoint, your mental health is much more important than your physical health. Not to say that they're not, neither of them are important, but all three of those things,
I think so.
mental, physical, and spiritual, have to be, I guess I'm going to say healthy now
Or
instead
in
of
balance,
normal or intact or in balance.
Or at homeostasis.
Yeah,
Like I still
let's go
like
with-
homeostasis.
I love homeostasis.
It's just that I was just trying to debrief. We were talking earlier about homeostasis, just the idea of like dynamic regulation, because really there's a lot of it'll be coming out, I'm sure, in the next 5 to 10 years about regulation, because how
Right.
we regulate ourselves is kind of really key to finding, I think, the balance. Because if we become dysregulated, looking in the mirror at ourselves, how do we become? And the way I coin it or say it is, how do we keep recalibrating ourselves throughout the day? And
Wow, yeah. So that's a great point, right? So when you think about the difference between those three things that I keep mentioning, mental, physical, and spiritual, imagine if you spent all of your time on your mental health and neglected your physical health. There's no balance.
Right.
Or if
I've done
you
that
were,
before when I was doing my PhD.
All of us have, right? Or you spent all of your time on your physical well-being, but not much time on your mental health, and you don't believe or disbelieve in anything. Basically, you have no spirituality.
Yeah.
So you're not whole or complete, or better said, in balance.
So true. I mean, and especially like in relationships, I think it kind of goes along with the idea of like pull yourself up by the bootstraps or suck it up or those kind of ideas, is the idea that, I just lost my train of thought. We were talking about being a whole person. Oh, when we come into a relationship, the idea that we kind of are half of a circle and we meet someone else and they kind of complete us. What I try to teach people about is really checking in and figuring out how you are a whole person. And then, you find another person, or you have your relationships, and the overlap is really just a small ellipse in a healthy relationship. So it doesn't swallow you up. And you have this feeling of, completeness or integrity in a way.
Right. And that goes beyond just the relationship, right? You can extrapolate that out to the organization that you work in and serve. You can extrapolate it out to the community. All of those thoughts that you just put together apply to all of those relationships, I think.
I do too. I agree completely. Well, there's a lot of complexity in a way, but at the same time, like, it's simple. Like we've been talking about, thinking about your attitude, checking in with yourself, collaborating, and kind of camaraderie, and also being authentic, I think, with yourself and who you're with, and not feeling afraid of who you are, which I think we're kind of entering a new era in a way. I'm very hopeful about that. That people can be more authentic and peaceful with themselves.
Right. And then that translates, and if you are able to achieve that, then you can see value in others. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is super, super important, because the intersections that you were talking about that complete each of us, those are all required.
Yep.
That's not, nobody can get through this life or, healthily alone.
I know, we need others.
Yeah, exactly. But in order to let others in, we must see value.
Especially now with like technology. I mean, there's a lot of beauty behind technology because we can talk to each other and reach each other, but also I think we've become more disconnected. So I always think that's an important thing to consider, is how much time people.
You should use it to enhance, but not replace.
Exactly.
Right. How different would our conversation right now be if just you and I were on the phone?
Right.
No visual cues, no connection.
Well, that's why I do like to do it live. Well, because we're kind of like in this connection, and we're having this like very interchangeable, close.
Right. I'm picking up cues from you. You're picking up cues from me.
Which are really actually important, because we get mirror neurons that way, and we need that for development. And some of us never really got even those developing, but those are really critical. When we look at someone, it builds our mirror neurons. And our visual cortex, our eyes are much more than just seeing. Our eyes take in a lot of information processing. So it's really critical if you look at someone, and I know you have great eye contact, to really practice that, because you can kind of see into each other and connect.
I am learning so much today. This is outstanding.
Me too. Well, I try to do little tidbits of.
It's great.
Thank you. You're very
sweet. I'm
sweet.
really enjoying it.
Kevin, and we haven't talked about our hugs yet either. Oh. So Kevin and I and our friend Lisa, we're kind of on this mission in a way to bring people closer, like we've been talking about. And one of the ways I think it's really healthy to bring people closer is to hug. And we were talking a bit about that before the show. And
so I'll just share the same story that I shared with you. I met a person named Kristen Thompson. who's a division chief at another fire department in Southern California. And the first time that I met her, she hugged me, and I thought it was wonderful, right? And so I said, well, very nice to meet you. And she goes, yeah, so I'm a hugger. And I go, that's wonderful, especially in this day and age, right? And she goes, well, you know that the research suggests and supports 7 hugs a day. And that if you do enjoy 7 hugs a day, you're actually getting 7 connections in your life that you wouldn't have had otherwise, and there will be a positive result. She didn't use the word balance, but I'm going to use the word balance. A positive result, to your balance internally. And so I thought about that and reflected on how it made me feel that's how she greeted me. And I go, man, I think you're onto something, Kristen. And so I'm a very, very firm believer in that. So I shared that with Lisa, right, our mutual friend. And Lisa said, well, did you know that if you hold the hug for a certain number of seconds, 20, there you go. If you hold the hug for 20 seconds, it has even greater benefits.
You can feel, and if you're listening, you can try this with someone. And also in America, I notice we don't hug heart to heart. So we kind of turn our body like that. But it really is about bringing your heart, because your heart has a lot of beautiful elements. And even now we know, like, the heart actually has the same neurons as our brain does. So our heart kind of has a brain. And to bring our heart closer to other people. And also, if you hug for 20 seconds, and, you can just count 1, 2, 3, or however you like to do it. And you get to 20, you can feel you get a nice cortisol, is that the right word?
I think you...
Yeah, cortisol. Yeah. You get the love chemical kind of gets released. And so it's like a stress reducing reaction. And you can feel it too. Your whole body can kind of get nice and relaxed.
Awesome.
Then the other thing that we were talking about with hugging other people is, especially for men, it really is important to hug. And it could be other men or other women or whoever you want it to be. But the idea of men hugging and touching more people is really healthy, because I think men don't get touched as much. And they found that men actually live longer when they get touched more.
Right.
So I think socially it's very important for men to have that opportunity. I mean, I know having a young son who loves to hug, and my husband likes to hug too, but also I can just see that, generationally, how men, right, have been conditioned, or people have been conditioned too, to not hug each other.
That's right.
So maybe you'll hear in the future about a hug campaign or something. We'll start getting people.
It's always strange as a man, because you don't want to be that creepy hugger guy, right? So,
but I didn't feel that way when I hugged you at all. I mean, some people, it's like you could kind of feel that there's that sense.
I apologize.
You get to hear Kevin's music. That's okay. So basically, what the idea is to bring your heart closer to other people, and just to feel connected and close to other people. We have time just for a couple more questions, but I was just thinking, Kevin, if there's someone who's listening, who's interested in being like a firefighter or being involved in disaster recovery or like community resilience or any of those things, that's listening. If I know a lot of the students have maybe gone home, but they still might be listening, because this kind of plays around the world. I was wondering, how do you think that a younger person or someone entering that field could approach their profession from like a healthy perspective? Do you have any recommendations from all your years of experience?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to go back to the balance theme, right? So everything should be done in balance or in moderation. So I wouldn't suggest that anybody sacrifice a relationship or their part in a community for anything else. So in moderation, right? So what we see frequently is when somebody goes on the track to be an emergency responder, that's all they think about. That's all that they do. Their relationships suffer. And so that would be my first comment. Second is...
So not to let your relationship suffer, okay?
Yeah. Second comment would be track down somebody that's doing the job right now, that's interested in helping you, that maybe you look as a role model or at least a mentor, and have them help guide you through that process.
Yep.
So we're always looking, right, for these wonderful men and women to come help us. And
do you have to start out as because I always thought to be a fireman, you have to start out like working for the forestry department. Is that not true? You don't.
There's alternatives, right? So you can start as a seasonal firefighter for the National Forest or for CAL FIRE, and then kind of work in to gain experience to make yourself more marketable in the testing process. It's a regular civil
I'm just
service
so thankful for the
process.
firefighters because I know we had the fire a couple weeks ago. I live in San Roque, and I actually wrote Brian Roberson. I said, I hope you're bringing in helicopters because I can see it from my living room. I mean, I could really literally see it. But then there was a moment I thought, wow, you're really out there, you know what I mean? Breathing in the smoke and the heat and the wind. And it's a big commitment to be able to stand. I know you're all passionate about that, but still, it's a risky job too.
Sure.
So thank you for protecting our community too. You know what I mean? That means a lot to us.
Thank you for the privilege of protecting these communities.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's like a mutual kind of relationship.
Right.
And if you're just jumping in, we're here with Kevin Taylor, who's the Montecito Fire Chief, and we're talking about firefighting, disasters, and community resilience. I was just going to ask you maybe two more questions. I was wondering, Kevin, have you heard of any campaigns or organizations that in the firefighting, disaster, community resilience fields, I was kind of talking about this a little bit before, that work specifically toward reducing mental health stigma, like a campaign or an organization? And I think we went over one of them.
Yeah, there's several. You mentioned one, the IAFF Peer Support Network, Peer Support Counseling. There's a program called At Ease that was started by this wonderful retired sergeant from Santa Barbara Police Department that is free of charge for all first responders, their families, and it's completely anonymous.
Do you think there's I don't really watch TV, but on TV, are there any I know people love TV, so is there any kind of campaigns on TV where people talk? I always ask this question.
Oh my gosh.
Because I'm just curious, if...
So I hate to admit this, but I don't watch TV either.
You don't? Okay. I was just curious because I was thinking it'd be great, like a guy like you, if you had someone that was in that field and said, hey, this is...
Right. I'm sure that there's been PSAs on that, but I don't have any firsthand knowledge of them. I apologize.
I was just thinking, I guess I have this idea that it's okay. You don't need to apologize. Yeah. It's just an idea to stimulate that thought too.
Sure.
Like, what if each community had that? And it was like the person you knew in your community, that was kind of someone you look up to or trust or rely on, was able to demystify that for you. So I'm just always thinking of ways we can do that. But I think there are more campaigns and things and we were talking about IA.
Yep, IAFF.
Which has kind of come together. We were talking about IAFF earlier, which is an organization that's helping to reduce mental health stigma with firefighters. And also, is that an international organization?
It is.
So that's great. So it's global.
It is.
Which is big.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question.
I'm ready.
Thanks so much. I was wondering, Kevin, how do you think that we could begin working toward acceptance of mental health? I know we've talked a little bit about that, too. I mean... in our community, how do you think people could go about doing that? Just putting more mental health in their life? Yeah.
Right. So through very small changes, right? Recognizing that we all are who we are, and that the only way that we as individuals can be accepted is to have empathy and acceptance for other individuals, and that's a really important part of our existence and kind of our humanness, I guess, is that I recognize and understand the things that you may be going through, and you recognize or understand the things that I may be going through.
Right, we consider each other's places.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all normal, or as you would say, that's all healthy.
It's just part of life, really. It is what it is, kind of.
Yeah, I really, really like the river analogy, right? Because I'm thinking of river rafting trips, where you get in and you have a very calm section, and then there's a little minor rapid that you have to navigate with your boat crew.
Yeah.
And it's a little small step outside the comfort zone.
Well, and I mean, we have that all day long. I mean, what I teach people that I was training is kind of the idea of waves. So it's like, how do we meet the waves as they come versus so they don't become like a tsunami?
Sure.
And, sometimes the waves are kind of lapping, but we have to be able to notice what the wave is and say, okay, here it comes. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Because, continuing on that trip, they don't put you in the biggest rapid right off the bat. You go through a small one. And so you've just become more comfortable in that boat on the river, and you've done a rapid. And then the second one's a little bit bigger, a little more challenging, a bigger challenge. Another small step outside the comfort zone, and you successfully navigate that. And then at the end of the day, you're at the big rapid, Troublemaker, or I can't remember the Class 10 rapid on the Grand Canyon.
Oh my gosh, I don't know that one. I haven't done that yet. I want to try it.
So, and you successfully navigate that, and all of a sudden, that river it represents a change for the person and the boat crew that went through it, right? It's no longer this aerial photo that you're looking at going, oh my gosh, there's no way I could successfully navigate that, because you just did.
Right, and I think that's another critical piece that'll be coming out too in literature, and that I'm very into, is consciousness, which is,
right.
Literally, it's kind of like a fancy term for awareness. So how do we meet with the wave? If we get a wave of awareness, how do we learn, to respond or react more skillfully with ourselves and with others, But we have to be able to face the wave and be aware of it. And then, I love the idea of self-love. How do we give ourselves a little love for what we're going through versus beating ourselves up, which I think we've kind of gotten accustomed, like the idea of that pull yourself up again, But really it's important to be tender to ourselves for whatever we go through in life.
Yeah, we should be so we should each be our number one advocate, right?
Right, we should be our most loyal friend.
You would
exactly.
think, yeah.
Well, I think I was watching Mr. Rogers even. I used to watch it as a kid, and there's like a newer movie, but then there's a movie that's mostly him.
Oh.
And he said, we really need to learn to put more kindness into our lives, but also we need to learn about grief. And I think grief, it doesn't have to be somebody dying, but we have grief when we lose something, when we suffer in a way that is like grief. So I think it's important if we can be more kind to ourselves and others. I think kindness is kind of a critical piece, which it sounds like that's the overarching theme that you're all embracing.
I think so, yeah. Cut yourself some slack.
Exactly. Right. I know. It's true. Is that what you literally tell yourself?
That's what I tell myself.
Yeah,
because
too.
when you're doing that mirror test, you're a normal human being, you're going to find more flaws than you find successes. But then you have to cut yourself some slack
or
and
have a little humor even.
Precisely.
That's what I do with myself.
It's
I'm like,
forget about it. What are you thinking? Come on.
Well, because if you can do something, I think that can be actually an opportunity to evolve and grow.
Exactly.
So it might be actually sometimes the hardest things I find people have, if they can make it through that with support, sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, that was like so powerful because I'm totally a changed person.
Huh.
But they would never have known that if they hadn't endured, the pain and suffering. Because sometimes it's just like, if you're athletic and you want to get a good workout in, or you eat a certain way, or you want to take care of your mind, you are going to endure some struggles. It's not going to come easily, but the payoff is that it's an investment in yourself. And other people too, and then you learn to feel more close to others, I think.
It's the reward.
Exactly. It's the reward.
The reward for all that hard
and
work.
It doesn't have to be like, something material. It can be the reward of just fulfilling relationships, which I think is actually what we all want, really. Don't you think?
Yes. The only way to get through all of this is together. Can you imagine if you were alone in any of this, alone on a desert island? You're doomed.
Totally. We need each other.
Precisely. Well, agreed.
I think that the idea of self and other, we have to kind of move away from self, like thinking so much about ourselves. Now, my newest saying is that it's not selfish to have self-care, because I think people do think it is selfish that somehow to care about yourself. But caring about yourself is how you remain healthy. Selfishness is like, I think of that as like being mean to someone or inconsiderate or just, I don't know, doing something blatantly not nice. As being selfish. But take care of yourself, because that's actually what I think you're meant to do, so you can feel healthy and enjoy life, because each day is a special gift.
Hard to take care of anyone else if you aren't taking care of yourself.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I think the idea we were talking about throughout the show is like taking baby steps. So you don't have to, and I've had other people come on too, like famous artists and things, and it's like, you don't get from like being like starting out being a painter to like, world renowned. Sometimes it takes 20, 30 years. But
it's supposed to take a lifetime.
Exactly. So, and that is true for all of our endeavors, I think, it's a lifetime journey with yourself and with others. Well, I do think that having compassionate conversations really builds inclusiveness and also teaches others what you learn. So that's why I enjoy doing this show. And I think we can do this by starting to treat each other as equal and also reducing discrimination. So let's create more conversations and a culture that are accepting of each person as we work toward prevention. I wanted to thank you for coming on the show, Kevin. Do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Oh, I would just say thank you. And I very much enjoyed being here.
Oh, thank you. Well, I enjoyed having you. And what's wonderful about Kevin is that he's like, I probably don't even realize how high up Kevin is on the ladder of firemen, but he's very down to earth. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
What we were talking about, you're welcome, is just kind of the idea, like what the Dalai Lama says, that we're all here breathing in the same air. So even though he and I have different professions, we can kind of relate on that. And also, I appreciate that you're humble. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And I think some ways we can work together to help a creative and supportive environment that can empower and care for the individuals, like volunteering, checking in with ourselves, learning about other cultures, getting accurate information from accurate, reliable sources. Make sure where you get your science studies, make sure they're from a reliable source. And I think this can lead to understanding, including, and caring. And I'm always trying to imagine a world where we can share our feelings and thoughts more freely, and where we can move toward health for all humans. And I know there's a lot of work to be done, but I think if we each do our part toward ending negative perceptions about mental health and well-being and raise awareness, we can live in a more loving, safe, and accepting world. I want to thank my special guest, Kevin, for coming in today and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you have questions, feel free to write me on my Facebook page, The Dr. Deborah Show, or if you have questions for Kevin. Is there a way, if somebody had a question for you, they could reach you?
Yeah, it can be reached at Montecito Fire Department, 805-969-7762.
Thank you so much for coming on. And just a quick shout out to HopeNet of Carpinteria. I'm on the board of HopeNet of Carpinteria, and they're just a group of concerned citizens. We're always working to provide education and resources to prevent suicide. Also, if you or someone you know needs help in Santa Barbara, we have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the Santa Barbara Access Line. That number is 1-888-868-1649. And we're live at KCSB FM Santa Barbara 91.9. Next week, we will have a pre-recorded show with Alan Kozlowski, who worked with the Beatles and Kenny Loggins, Jeff Bridges. So it's an interesting show all about music and mental health. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And in the meantime, have a great week.